Good evening, fellow Plexers. Tonight we're going to help Tonya from the Plexaholics Facebook group pick out a NAS. She's looking for something that will be able to add more drives, which is what a NAS does, and she wants to start out small, but she wants to buy the right NAS. She wants a lot of bays with not many drives at this point, and then add drives as she can afford them. And she wants to be able to run Plex on it. So she's listed some different models here. So it all starts with, naturally, a Plex support article. And there's one titled NAS Compatibility List. So let's talk about a network attached storage device first of all. There's basically two types of them. There's a dumb file server that's not very powerful. It's got a low powered CPU in it. And then there's models that have a more powerful CPU that can run services on it. Basically programs that are network services, like Plex. And some of them have an iGPU with an Intel processor that's quite capable of hardware accelerated transcoding. So if you're going to buy a NAS that has a lot of bays in it, I think it's just smart, whether you need that power or not, to have one capable of doing hardware accelerated transcoding. You may not need it where you live because you might have gig fiber access, but then if you move someplace and you're stuck with maybe a 15 megabit per second outgoing connection or a 20, you'll want transcoding to compensate for the lack of outgoing bandwidth. So just don't assume that you'll be in the same place forever if you're lucky enough to have gig fiber access like I do. So let's look at the NAS models that she's submitted screenshots of. One is a TerraMaster F6424. So I'm going to click into the compatibility guide, and that actually downloads the spreadsheet that Plex maintains and updates to your system. So it gives you the capability through software transcoding and through hardware transcoding. So the first one is a TerraMaster, so let's slide down. And it's a F6424. F6424. So this has an Alder Lake N95 processor, which has an Intel iGPU in it. So basically, we can ignore the software side because even the best, fastest Intel CPU or AMD CPU doesn't have enough power to transcode many 4K streams. You get one or two out of it, you're doing very well. 4K transcoding is very resource intensive on the CPU. So what we want is the other column. So you see it'll easily do 480p, 720p, 1080p. And when we get to the 4K, it says that, well, I've got bubbles in the way, SDR only for this H.264 encoded media. All right, I don't know how to get rid of the bubbles. Well, so I won't hover the mouse over it. But then for HEVC SDR and HEVC HDR, it'll hardware accelerated transcode with the output as H.264 only. But Plex now has added HEVC transcoding, and it seems to work on my Synology NAS with a 9th gen Celeron processor in it. It doesn't work on my older Synology NAS with an older Celeron processor that has a HD graphics 500 iGPU. The newer NAS has the UHD graphics 600 iGPU, and the new HEVC transcoding works on 4K media. So basically you have to check here. So her next screenshot is a QNAP TS832PX. So let's go up to the QNAPs. TS832. Okay. And it's a PX-4G. I don't think they're going to break it down past the 832PX. So if we bring this back over, we see that this is an ARM version 8 CPU, an Alpine AL324. This would be considered a dumb file server. And if we go over to the hardware accelerated transcoding, you see it's a no across all the columns. So this is not in the running unless you were planning on running Plex someplace else that pointed back to the media. But for the price of what it's going for in this screenshot, $1309, I think it's a big waste of money. So that's a definite no. So ASUS Store, the model is a Lockstor 6 Gen 2 AS6706T. Now, I don't know exactly what that's going to be, but that's going to be more powerful than my newer Synology NAS, a 2020 model. So let's go see how that stacks up. AS6706T. All right, so this is a newer Celeron from what I'm running, an N5105, and you can just copy this and Google it. So let's do that. Let me do this i5 9500 because that's what's in one of my bench systems. Let's do CPU Monkey. Okay, the older i5 has 9 cores versus 10 cores. Coffee Lake is older than Jasper Lake. So we don't really care about how fast the CPU can do things. We just really care about the iGPU. So I know that the Intel UHD Graphics 630 is in this chip, and this has got Intel UHD Graphics 24. This is probably going to be just about as capable iGPU-wise as this older 9th gen Intel processor. So this would be a fine NAS. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bays. And I did a little checking beforehand. Another component is, does the NAS model you're buying have a matching expansion unit? And for this ASUS Store NAS, it can take up to 2 of these expansion units. So let's look at this at Amazon. So down the road, if you want to expand your array, you can plug up to 2 of these 4-bay units into it to have a total of 14 drives. Now, long-term planning, you might want to start out with RAID 6 for 2 disk redundancy if you're going to expand that far from the original NAS unit. And that means you'll need at least, I think, 4 drives to start that RAID 6 array off, which we'll talk about that later on. So this ASUS Store NAS has a decent enough processor for hardware acceleration, and it also has the expandability. Okay, what's next on our list? The TerraMaster F6 424 Max. Let's get back down to the T's. All right, I just want to double check to make sure the first TerraMaster was an F. Oh, so I looked at the wrong one. I looked at the F4 424 for the first one, and it was an F6. Did I do that? Alder Lake N95. Okay, both the F4 and the F6 both have the same CPU, so it didn't really matter. But now we're looking at the max, and I don't see a max. All right, what is the processor? Oh, that's a nice unit. That'll take you far into the future. This 12th gen processor is going to have a great iGPU. Let's get a Google look at this. Is it a 6-bay NAS? I think it's a 6-bay NAS. And you can go to NAS Compares to look at a review on this. And I'm sure it's going to come up as a nice review. So let's do this. Let's see if this has an expansion unit. Well, it may not have an expansion unit. Because nothing's coming up. Six bays are a lot. All right, let's see what that goes for. $1,000 at Amazon. The one that's not a max is cheaper. Let's see if B&H Photo has that. I bought Synology equipment from B&H and Amazon and drives from both B&H and Amazon. All right, so it's $1,000 there too. Nice CPU. Okay, is there anything left on our list? Okay, drive. So we got to drive a 10 terabyte Iron Wolf Pro. I use Iron Wolf Pro and Iron Wolf drives. 10 terabytes at $349 seems like an outrageous price, but none of these prices seem good. But they're in dollars, so I don't know why these are so expensive. So if I go to B&H, they got a 10 terabyte here for $304, but that's still expensive. So every 16 terabyte Iron Wolf Pro I bought, and I have 8 of them in my Synology NAS and its expansion unit. I think I paid $289 or $269 for them. I've always gotten them on sale. So here's a 12 terabyte for $249 versus $349 for the 10 terabyte. Let's see what else they have. This is a 2-pack. Then let's check out Amazon. So when I search with drives from the Seagate store, I see 12 terabyte drives for $235, but there's only 2 left. But it doesn't ship from Amazon. I would not buy a hard drive from Amazon unless it was Amazon fulfilled, and this isn't Amazon fulfilled. and neither's this one. This is why I bought my recent drives from B&H. So yeah, see, none of these are Amazon fulfilled. Wholesale Haven or Heaven. Yeah, nothing here is Amazon fulfilled. Most of my 16 terabyte drives and all my previous drives all came from Amazon because they're all Amazon fulfilled, all in the retail, nice Seagate packaging. And I just won't buy from a third-party vendor off from Amazon. I'd rather buy from B&H where I know it's going to be a retail drive and not an OEM drive. This is what happens sometimes. If somebody buys a drive from Newegg, in small print someplace, it might be an Iron Wolf Pro drive, as a buddy of mine online had happened, and it was wrapped in bubble wrap because it was an OEM drive. It was not in the retail packaging. He sent it back, and then he bought from B&H for the same price to get a retail drive. So right now, this is where I'd be shopping. They have a return policy. They've been in business for a long time, and they do pretty decent shipping too. So just my advice. These prices are through the roof, and I don't know. I can't see the rest of the screenshot. I don't know where they're fulfilled from, but I would bet they're not from Amazon. Okay, what else did I want to talk about? So Tonya can't afford to buy enough drives right off the bat, and she wants to be able to plug her portable drives in. I'm sure you can plug one in. I don't know if you can plug a hub in, but that's only a stopgap solution because with a NAS, you want to use RAID. There's no RAID with a USB drive. Where a USB drive comes in with a NAS is one big honking sized one to use as a backup. And you do it from a cold storage point of view. Maybe once a week you plug the USB in and you do an incremental backup because you've already done the full backup. And when the backup's finished, you unplug that USB drive, put it someplace safe, and it's turned off. It's now cold storage. When you need to do your next backup, you plug it in, do the next incremental backup, and then it gets unplugged and becomes cold storage again. The whole idea of a NAS is to have redundancy. And let me show you my backup solution. Okay, so this is the interface for my Synology DS1520 Plus. And I have an expansion unit on this, a 5-bay expansion unit. So the first two bays have a 1 terabyte SATA Western Digital SSD in a RAID 1 configuration. That's for my Synology packages and my Docker containers to run on a fast SSD volume. And you see, my usable space left is 744 gigabytes. Now, I've got everything I need running on this. I'm not going to grow this space at all. So 2 1 terabyte SSDs are plenty. And then the remaining data volume is made up of those 16 terabyte drives. There's 8 of them, and it's in an SHR2, Synology Hybrid RAID 2 configuration, which is like RAID 6 with 2 disk redundancy, but it's flexible. You can mix drive sizes when you create the array initially, and then if you end up with all the same size drives, you can then upgrade to larger drives one at a time. Now, RAID 6 used to be like RAID 5, from my understanding. Whatever you put in there, you were stuck with that size. But I think most of the NAS manufacturers now allow you to update to larger drives. You'll need to install so many larger drives before you recover that space from the extra capacity. So this expandability is great. I love Synology hardware. I love DSM. It's probably the best NAS operating system out there. But all their 2025 models are going to require branded Synology drives, which are made by Toshiba. I think I mentioned I got the last 16 terabyte Iron Wolf for, I think it was $269. The normal price on the Synology branded 16 terabyte drive is $329. If you want rock solid performance and you can stomach the higher price of drives and maybe a little bit longer lead time to get a replacement in, the Synology NAS is still a great unit. Unfortunately, not all of their models have an Intel processor and iGPU. Most of them have an AMD, and there's no 5-bay or 8-bay NAS currently that has an Intel processor like my 2025-bay does. So you limit yourself. You have to go down to a 4-bay that's not expandable or a 2-bay that's not expandable to have that Intel processor. So Synology's great, but you'd have to run Plex someplace else like I do. Now, when you get a NAS, a lot of Plex NAS roads lead to a trash guide setup. And let's see. These are my containers. This is just a test Plex server. I have lots of test Plex servers, not my regular one. SobNZBD is the service that brings files in from Usenet. Prowler is where I load my indexers into. Basically, they're services that tell you where items are in Usenet. This is a standalone Usenet search service. Then I have Sonar running. I don't use Radar. And since I've recently redone my NAS, I haven't gotten my LiDAR container back yet. There's some issues with LiDAR right now, and I'm waiting for them to get straightened out before I add that back into the mix to look for new music albums. Sonar handles TV shows and Radar handles movies. I'd rather collect movies manually than run Radar. So a good NAS is a good place to run these services, and if you can run Plex on the right one, you're golden. So I don't know all the details of all the different models, but if the NAS has a couple M.2 sockets in it, and you can create a volume there, you want to put a couple SSDs in it right away so that your packages, your applications, your services run off that, or your Docker containers run off that fast array, and then your data could be on the rusty array. And that's what I do. So if I go to drives, here's my 2 SSDs. And again, I've got plenty of extra room because it's only software. It's not like I'm going to install 100 services on here or 100 applications. And then the rest of these drives are all the rusty array. Okay, so I was going to talk about my backup. My older Synology NAS also has an expansion unit. This is filled with 5 8-terabyte drives and 5 12-terabyte drives. And this is how much free space I have currently. I'll run out of free space here before my primary NAS does. And I may have to start replacing the 8-terabyte drives with something larger to gain some extra space. So here's the 5 12-terabyte and the 5 8-terabyte. My newer NAS will take another expansion unit. This one only takes 1 expansion unit, but I still have a ways to go. So I want to show Tonya another option whose only real drawback is the lack of an expansion unit. Ugreen has been on the scene for about a year, and I just purchased their better 4-bay NAS. And I've had it a couple weeks, and I've got a test server set up on it, and I'm very impressed. Each of these has a Intel processor that's capable of running Plex from better than decently to phenomenally. So I bought the 4-bay unit that has the better processor in it. I bought this Ugreen DXP 4800 Plus. These two have phenomenal processors in it. And let's just, for comparison, let's see how much the 6-bay is. It's on sale right now for $1,000 marked down from $1,200. And let me see if I can do a comparison here. Alrighty, so here's mine. Here's the plain 4-bay, and here's the two better ones. So let's look at the processor. The 12th gen Intel processor. You can't beat that. Same processor in both the 6 and the 8-bay. Let's not look at that one. So, oh, there is M.2 slots. So they all have two M.2 slots besides the M.2 NAS. And you can create read-write cache with two of them. You can have just read cache with a single one, or you can combine both M.2 slots into a volume like I've done. So let me bring that in now. Here's my Ugreen NAS. And if I go to storage, now these slots are actually on the bottom of the unit where the memory goes, and I have upgraded the memory. This came with an 8 gigabyte Samsung stick of memory. I've added another identical Samsung stick of memory to it for 16 gigabytes. So I've got four older 4 terabyte Iron Wolf drives in it. I set up a RAID 6 array, 2 drive redundancy, and the two M.2 drives. And I've created 2 shared folders. One Docker shared folder for some Docker containers on the SSD volume 1. And then I've got my normal test Plex media on the Rusty volume. And this thing is pretty quick. So let's bring in the web app, and I'll go to that test server, and let's go to this, and let's go to the transcoder settings. So it's an Intel Alder Lake UHD graphics iGPU, and I think I had 7 transcodes going of a very high bitrate 4K HEVC stream to 7 devices in my home before an 8th stream made things a little unstable. That 8th stream started to buffer a bit. Not a lot, a little bit, while the other 7 streams stayed stable. I think this is a, it tells the CPU model right here. It's a Intel Pentium Silver 8505. I think of that as a modern day Celeron, but a little bit better. The plain 4-bay NAS has an N100, and that's recommended in the group a lot. I think this is about as powerful as like a 8th through 10th gen regular desktop Intel CPU with the UHD Graphics 630 iGPU. Actually, I think this is just a little pokier than that for hardware accelerated transcoding, but very close. But it's still decent. And things are just that much better if you install your applications on the M.2 first volume. Forget about cache for Plex. You don't need it. So the downfall to this model is there's no expansion unit to hook to it. But it does have, well, I'm not sure if all of them. My better 4-bay one has a 10 gigabyte LAN port. One 2.5 and one 10 gig. The regular 4-bay one has two 2.5 gigabytes, and then the 2-bay just has one 2.5. This is the SSD one. The 6 and 8-bay have two 10 gigabyte ports, so that's great for future expandability when everybody has fiber in their home and they start coming out with more affordable 10 gigabyte network switches. So I really like this line. I think it's pretty good. I've only had it 2 weeks. And the nice thing about it is it's got a little built-in drive that has the Ugreen OS installed on it. Well, if you wanted to, let me go back to this. If I wanted to, I could use these two M.2 slots to install another OS. Or if you wanted to use Unraid, Unraid boots off a flash drive. This could become an Unraid server. You could use the two M.2 slots as what Unraid calls a cache pool, which is redundancy. It's a RAID 1 redundant volume just for your Docker containers and VMs. And then you'd use the RAID-like way that Unraid gives you redundancy. And Unraid is probably the best answer for Tonya's solution. Unraid will read USB drives fine, and you can copy as much data as you want to the first disk you put into an Unraid system. Then if you're concerned with redundancy, you take the largest drive you have and you add that as a parity drive, one disk redundancy. So if you can empty another drive onto the first drive you've purchased, when that drive's empty, you can add it as another drive, and Unraid makes the two regular drives one volume, basically, with a larger drive in there as parity. So you can kind of empty a drive and then add it to the system. So if she's got media on 4 different systems, well, they're all running a drive someplace. Unraid is probably the best thing to mix and match drive sizes. The only requirement is that your largest drive is the parity drive, and you can have up to 2 parity drives. So that would match really well with a 6 or 8 bay NAS by Ugreen. And as long as you don't let an operating overwrite the little drive they use for their operating system, which is none of these bays, you can go back to the Ugreen operating system anytime you want. Now, you can force an install of something like Proxmox or TrueNAS to its internal drive, and if you overwrite the Ugreen operating system, you're stuck. You can't go back. But Unraid would kind of be a perfect match for something like this if you wanted the flexibility of adding one drive at a time and still have them all treated as one volume. And Unraid's not really that hard. Now, I know you can put Unraid on a QNAP NAS, and you might be able to do the same thing with TerraMaster or ASUS Store. I just don't know that. So again, Ugreen, it lacks the expandability. A little research, the ASUS Store AS6706 and its ability to take 2 of those 4 bay expansion units, that's not a bad deal either. So say Tonya started out with 2 drives for a RAID 5 array, if she could swing 2 new drives. Well, her other portable drives, maybe you'd chuck them and you could put them in these bays as a JBOD drive. Plex server running on it would have access to the volume here for new data. And then it could still point to the other libraries all in this. There's a lot of possibilities. And I'm probably not helping her narrow things down. But at least we discounted this, because this is just a dumb file server. It doesn't have the ability to run Plex with hardware accelerated transcoding, and you definitely are not going to get even one software transcode out of this. And you can't even transcode 720p down to 480p or SD quality levels with this baby. It's just a dumb file server that holds a lot of drives. So really, there's nothing bad here besides that one. This is capable N95 quad core. This is way overpriced. This is a fabulous Intel processor and iGPU. I just don't think they make an expansion unit for this. But this would be great too if you had enough money to start out with a couple drives to have RAID redundancy. And I guess that's where I'll talk about it, things last. You hear people blurt out really quickly, RAID is not a backup. Well, backup's all well and good until you find out that your backup failed when you go to restore. So there's really three or four prongs to data integrity. Decent hardware that you're not hacking in any way. You want to use the manufacturer's software. You want to do things by the book, just like Plex. You want a good foundation, name correctly, do everything right, and you'll never have a problem. Well, you just can't buy a NAS and hard drives. You also have to buy a UPS, an uninterruptible power supply, because you want to make sure you have stable power going into it so that the drives never see power fluctuations where the power rises or lower. You want just the steady level into this. And you also want the protection from a sudden cutoff of power, which a UPS does. The UPS is a battery in it, so if power fails, this keeps running on the same clean level power, but the UPS is connected to the NAS with a USB cable, and when you set it up in the settings, you can program your NAS to shut down 3 or 4 or 5 minutes after it loses power, and when power is restored, it starts back up. There's no stress on this at all. I mean, this is a 24/7 device. It's not like a computer that you shut off when you go to bed. You want Plex to be doing its background maintenance task overnight when no one's streaming off the server. It's always on. The drives are always spinning, and that's why you buy good quality NAS drives to put in it. I like Western Digital Red drives and Seagate Iron Wolf drives. I've bought, I think, 22 Iron Wolf or Iron Wolf Pros. No, I'm sorry. I've purchased 10, 18, 22, and I've got 2 Western Digital Red SSDs in one Synology NAS, and I have 2 more of them in my unRAID setup that points back to my Synology NAS. So, you want to have RAID redundancy. If somebody says RAID's not a backup, well, they're only telling you a little bit, and it almost sounds like it's being disparaging. RAID is your first line of defense against data loss, but it's only the first line of defense if you have a UPS connected, because a UPS makes sure that things with your power doesn't screw things up. Backup is your next line of defense, but it has to be a backup that gets used automatically. So another NAS is the perfect backup. Another NAS that lives off-site because you have gig fiber access and off-site has gig fiber access is even better. You don't put a NAS in your basement under your drain pipes. You don't put a NAS in your basement anywhere near your water supply. You really want it on the other side of the basement from that, because if a pipe springs a leak, that may spray 10, 12 feet. Or you might want it in a separate room in the basement that water can't get to if a pipe bursts and it sprays. So you got to think about those things to be fully protected. But don't let anybody think that RAID is a bad option because it's not a backup. RAID is the first line of defense. Got to have a UPS on there for protection. And then you have a backup system that you actually use. And if anybody tells you that everything's easy to replace with a trash guide setup, well, common media is easy to replace. But I've been doing Plex since 2019, and I had a media collection older than that. My music collection, some of it's 30 years old. There's some albums I can't find any place through Usenet or torrents. I've bought some used albums off from eBay to get the music I want to rip myself because certain things just aren't available. I've let Qubit Torrent run with a torrent in it for up to a year to get it to complete. And I've probably done that a dozen times. 6 months, 8 months, 12 months. I'll leave it in there forever because just boom, one night, somebody pops on and it completes. There's a lot of media that's not easy to replace. So when somebody says, don't worry about a backup or don't worry about RAID because you can just recreate your media, sure, you can recreate Back to the Future movies. You can recreate the Fast and Furious movies. You can recreate the Marvel movies. But there's stuff that you might like that you'll never see again. And then for people who rip their own media, you might have spent the last 6 years and you might have ripped 500 TV shows and you might have ripped 2,000 movies. That's a lot of investment, time, and your time is worth something. It's enough to make a grown adult cry to have their NAS go down and lose all their data with 6 years of their life and spare time, all the ripping time they've spent to just go down the drain. So you've got to have RAID. My media collection is so large, I've just recently redone everything to go from 1 disk redundancy to 2 disk redundancy across 8 rusty drives. That's how much I believe in RAID. My data is not going anyplace and my data is backed up to boot. So strong opinions on this. And I know this is running long. So I apologize for that, Tonya. But none of these are bad choices. I like the one because it has the expansion ability. Which one was it? The ASUS store. You can add 2 4-bay expansion units. I like this a lot. It's got 2 M.2 NVMe slots. I'm not researching that for you tonight. Research it. Make sure you can create a RAID 1 redundant volume to run your applications on it or Docker containers. Docker's pretty easy under any NAS. Somebody's got to have instructions for this to get Portainer installed, and I can help you get Plex installed from Portainer. It's kind of just universal. So that's what I know about purchasing a NAS, and it all starts with the Plex NAS Compatibility Guide to see what type of CPU in it, and from there you can find out what type of iGPU, but nothing that's a dumb file server. If it's an Atom processor, if it's a ARM version 7 or 8, or a Realtek processor, they're just dumb file servers. And stay away from Xeons. I don't want to say all Xeons. I think there's a couple Xeons that have iGPUs, but most of them don't have an iGPU. They're powerful processors. They're more power hungry, and nothing you need for a Plex server. Nothing at all you need for a Plex server. You want the iGPU. And you can actually go through this and take a look. Like I'm sure this, where was it? I just lost it. This TerraMaster, 12th Gen i7, that's overkill. An i5 of this family would be fine. But I'm sure U8 means 8 bays. So you can kind of take a look through here and then go research the models from this. But everything with Plex starts with a support article. And there's the Plex NAS Compatibility Guide to start with here. All right, happy Plexing and good luck, Tonya. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And again, I'm very opinionated on the necessity of RAID and a backup. Thanks for watching.